There is a sentence in the Book of Enoch that describes the moment God pulled two things apart, and then the text stops. Chapter 60, verse 7. On that day, two monsters were parted. A female, named Leviathan, sent to the abysses of the ocean, over the fountains of the waters. A male, named Behemoth, given a waste wilderness called Duidon, east of the garden where the righteous dwell, one in the water, one in the dry land, separated on a single day, on purpose. Enoch does what you would do. He asks the angel to show him the power of these creatures. He wants to know why they were split, and the angel says, "Son of man, here you seek to know what is hidden." And then he changes the subject. That is the whole passage. 2 verses of description, 1 refused question, and the text moves on to something else entirely. In the next 20 minutes, you will see what the older sources say the separation was actually for, why one of the two was reportedly killed and the other sterilized, to guarantee they never met, where the wilderness called Duidon appears on an actual map, and what every one of these texts says happens on the day the two of them are finally brought back together. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here is what makes this stranger. The passage does not come from the part of Enoch you have heard about. Most people who know the Book of Enoch know the Book of the Watchers, angels descending on Mount Hermon, giants, the flood. That section survives in Aramaic among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, where 11 separate manuscripts of Enoch were recovered, catalogued as 4Q201 through 4Q212. More copies than were found of most books that stayed in the Bible. The monsters are not in that section. They appear in the Book of Parables, chapters 37 through 71. And the Book of Parables is the only major division of Enoch that Qumran did not produce. Not one fragment. 11 manuscripts of Enoch in those caves, and none of them contain the chapters about Leviathan and Behemoth. Joseph Millick, the scholar who spent decades on the scroll fragments, argued from that silence that the parables were a late Christian invention. A conference of Enoch specialists that met in 2005 reached a different conclusion, dating the material to the turn of the era, Jewish, roughly the 1st century before Christ. Either way, the chapters float free, no Aramaic original, no cave copy. The text survives complete in one language only, Ge'ez, the liturgical language of Ethiopia, preserved by a church that never removed Enoch from its canon in the first place. Which is why almost nobody in Europe read a word of it for more than 1,000 years. The Scottish traveler James Bruce carried 3 Ge'ez copies out of Ethiopia in 1773, and they sat largely unexamined until Richard Lawrence produced the first English translation in 1821. R. H. Charles published the edition most people still quote from in 1906. And when scholars finally had the whole text in front of them, the section they argued about hardest was the one with the monsters in it. Not because it was shocking, because it was unsupported. Every other part of Enoch could be checked against something. The parables could only be checked against themselves. And there is one more problem with chapter 60 that most readers never notice. The chapter opens with a date, the 500th year, in the life of Enoch. But 3 verses later, the narrator refers to my grandfather, the 7th from Adam. Enoch was the 7th from Adam, which means the person describing the two monsters is not Enoch at all. It is Noah. And the moment you know that, where the passage sits starts to matter. Chapter 60 is not a narrative. It is an inventory. Noah is shown a sequence of things held in reserve. The spirit of the thunder, the spirit of the lightning, and how the two are bound together so that neither moves without the other. The spirit of the sea, and the restraint placed on it. The spirit of the frost, the spirit of the hail, the spirit of the mist. Each one described the same way. A force, its assigned limit, and the power that holds it there. Leviathan and Behemoth appear in the middle of that list. Enoch does not file these two under animals. He files them under weather. He puts them in the category of forces that exist under permanent restraint, alongside the ocean itself, which the same chapter says was given a boundary it cannot cross. Whatever the writer thought these things were, he did not think they were large reptiles. He thought they belonged to the same class of thing as the storm and the sea. The names support that reading, and the names are usually mistranslated as names. Behemoth is not a proper noun. It is the Hebrew word behema, beast, put into an intensive plural. Hebrew does that when a thing exceeds its own category. The word does not mean a beast. It means beastliness itself, the thing that every other beast is a smaller version of. Leviathan comes from the root lawa, to coil, to twist, to wrap around. The coiled one. Not a species, a shape, a thing defined by the way it holds itself. The book of Job describes both of them at length, and Job is older. In chapter 40, God points to Behemoth. He eats grass like an ox. His strength is in his loins. He moves his tail like a cedar. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs bars of iron. He lies down under the lotus plants, in the covert of the reeds and the marsh. And then a line with no zoological meaning at all. He drinks up a river and is not alarmed. He is confident, though the Jordan rushes against his mouth. Then chapter 41 turns to Leviathan, and the tone changes completely. Can you draw him out with a fishhook? His rows of scales are shut up as with a tight seal. His sneezing flashes forth light. Out of his mouth go burning torches. His breath kindles coals. On the earth there is nothing like him, a creature made without fear. He looks on everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. And then Job ends. 4 verses later the book is over. Whatever Leviathan is, the entire argument of Job closes on him. But here is the part that reframes all of it. Leviathan is older than the Bible. In 1929, a farmer plowing a field on the Syrian coast near Ras Shamra struck the roof of a tomb. What archaeologists pulled out of that ground over the following seasons was the library of Ugarit, a Bronze Age city that had been gone for 3,000 years. The tablets carried the myths of Canaan, written in a language nobody had read since before the fall of Troy. One of those tablets names a creature called Lotan, the fleeing serpent, the twisting serpent, the one with 7 heads. Lotan, Leviathan, the same word with different vowels, and the Ugaritic version is roughly 7 centuries older than the prophet who used it. Because Isaiah, in chapter 27 verse 1, writes that the Lord will punish Leviathan the fleeing serpent, Leviathan the twisting serpent, and will slay the dragon that is in the sea. The fleeing serpent, the twisting serpent, the identical pair of epithets, in the identical order, carried across 700 years, a language barrier, and a complete religious revolution. Which means Enoch was not inventing anything. He was handling a name that was already ancient when the Hebrew Bible received it, and he was doing something with it that nobody before him had done. He was explaining the arrangement. Because Enoch tells you the two were parted, and then refuses to say why. A second text does not refuse. The book called 4th Ezra, written in the generation after the Romans burned the temple in Jerusalem, walks back through the days of creation and stops at the 5th. On the 5th day, the writer says, God commanded the waters to bring forth living creatures, and among them he made 2 great creatures, and he named the one Behemoth and the other Leviathan. And then comes the line Enoch leaves out, and he separated them from one another, because the 7th part of the world, the part where the water was gathered, could not hold them both. Read that again. They were not separated because one belonged in water and one belonged on land. They were separated because the ocean was not large enough to contain the 2 of them at the same time. The water could hold one, it could not hold 2. So Leviathan was given the watery 7th. And Behemoth, the text says, was given the dry land, and one part of it with 1,000 mountains. And then 4th Ezra adds the detail that turns the whole thing into a countdown. You have kept them to be eaten by whom you wish, and when you wish. Kept, not imprisoned, not punished. Kept, the way you keep something you intend to use later. But it gets stranger, because the rabbis solved the same problem in a way that is considerably more violent. In the Babylonian Talmud, in the tractate Bava Batra, folios 74 and 75, the rabbis discuss Leviathan directly. And in their version there are two of them, a male and a female, and the passage says, God looked at that pair and did the arithmetic. If the two were permitted to mate, their offspring would destroy the world, not damage it, destroy it. So according to the tradition preserved there, God castrated the male, and then killed the female, and salted her flesh, and stored it, to be served to the righteous at the end of days. Sterilize one, kill the other, preserve the body. And the tractate does not stop at the killing. It goes on to describe what is done with the remains. The flesh is served at the banquet of the righteous. The skin is stretched into a canopy over Jerusalem, and whatever is left of it is spread across the walls of the city, and the shine of it, the text says, carries to the ends of the earth. That is a strange thing to invent. The creature is not simply destroyed, it is processed, butchered, cured, and then structurally reused, as though the point was never to remove Leviathan from the world, but to convert her into a permanent fixture of it. Isaiah compresses the same event into one line. In that day the Lord, with his hard and great and strong sword, will punish Leviathan the fleeing serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. The sword is not drawn against the pair, it is drawn against the one in the water. Now notice what all three sources agree on, even while they disagree about the details. Enoch says the two were parted. 4th Ezra says the sea could not hold both. The Talmud says reproduction had to be made physically impossible. Three separate bodies of literature, in three languages, across several centuries, and not one of them says these creatures are dangerous because of what they might do to a person. They are dangerous because of what happens when there are two of them. The threat is not the monster. The threat is the pair, which raises the question these texts are extremely clear about and that almost nobody asks. If the separation is the safeguard, what happens when the separation ends? The Apocalypse of Baruch, written in roughly the same period, answers it in a single verse. Chapter 29. And it shall come to pass, when all is accomplished, that Behemoth shall be revealed from his place, and Leviathan shall ascend from the sea. And the two great monsters which I created on the 5th day shall be food for all who are left. Revealed from his place, ascend from the sea. The two of them, out of containment, in the same moment, at the end of the world. Enoch says the same thing in chapter 60, verse 24, in colder language. The angel of peace tells Noah that these two monsters are prepared, conformably to the greatness of God, and that they will feed, prepared. The same idea 4th Ezra used, kept, and underneath all of it sits one older line, Psalm 74 verse 14. You crushed the heads of Leviathan, you gave him as food to the creatures of the desert. Look at the geography in that sentence. A creature out of the sea, crushed, and then delivered as food to the desert. The one place in the Hebrew Bible where Leviathan's body actually moves, it moves inland, to the wilderness, which is exactly where the other one is. And that wilderness has a name, and the name is the most testable detail in the entire passage. Duidine. Some manuscripts render it Dendane, some Duidine. The Ge'ez spelling wobbles the way transliterated place names always wobble. Charles marked the word in his translation with daggers, the scholarly symbol for a reading the editor believes is corrupt. But it does not behave like a mythological word. It behaves like a place name, and Enoch gives it a coordinate, east of the garden. And the Greek translators of Genesis, working in Alexandria roughly 2 centuries before the parables were composed, rendered one particular Hebrew place name as Naid, Genesis chapter 4, verse 16. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Nod, Naid, Dendane, east of Eden in Genesis, east of the garden in Enoch. The same direction, the same relationship to the same landmark, in two texts separated by centuries. Enoch is telling you that Behemoth is sitting in the land where Cain was exiled, and Genesis is not vague about where that garden was. Chapter 2 names 4 rivers. 2 of them you can find on a modern map with no interpretation required: the Tigris, the Euphrates, which puts the wilderness east of that garden in southern Mesopotamia, modern Iraq. Now go back to Job's description and read it as terrain instead of poetry. Behemoth lies under the lotus plants, in the covert of the reeds and the marsh. A river rushes against his mouth, and he is not concerned. Reeds, marsh, lotus. Standing water in a hot country. That is not a desert, that is a wetland. And southern Iraq holds the largest wetland system in the Middle East, the Mesopotamian marshes, a landscape of reed beds and shallow water where the Tigris and the Euphrates meet, inhabited continuously for 5,000 years, and identified by a long tradition as the geography sitting behind the Eden story itself. In the 1990s, those marshes were deliberately drained, canals were cut, the water was diverted, and a wetland the size of a small country was reduced to salt crust and dust. After 2003, the embankments were broken, and the water came back across part of it. In 2016, the region was inscribed as a World Heritage Site, drained, reflooded, partially restored, and that figure from 4th Ezra, the 1,000 mountains, is not decoration either. It comes out of Psalm 50, where God says, "Every beast of the forest belongs to him, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills." The rabbis took that line literally and applied all of it to one animal. In their tradition, Behemoth grazes 1,000 mountains every single day, and every night the grass grows back, because there is no landscape on this planet capable of feeding him twice. An animal that consumes an entire mountain range daily and requires the world to regenerate behind him overnight. That is not a description of appetite. That is a description of something the planet is running maintenance on. And the same rabbis said he lies down in one place and does not move. Because if he moved, the arrangement would not hold. And here is the detail in Enoch that sits strangely against all of that. The text does not say Behemoth lives in Duidine. It says he occupies it with his breast. With his breast. A body positioned across the terrain. Not an animal inside a habitat. A mass filling a space, described the way you would describe something that determines the shape of the ground it rests on. Enoch calls the wilderness waste, desolate, empty. The thing occupying it with its body is why. But Behemoth is not the one these texts keep watching. He is on land. He is, in principle, findable. He is the settled half of the problem. The one still being held is the one in the water. And Enoch is oddly precise about where she is. Chapter 60, verse 7. Leviathan was sent to dwell in the abysses of the ocean, over the fountains of the waters. Over the fountains. Not simply in the sea, above the sources of it. In the cosmology these writers were working with, the fountains of the deep are the underground reservoirs that feed the ocean from below, the same ones Genesis says burst open to begin the flood. Enoch does not place Leviathan in open water. He places her directly on top of the mechanism that makes the water, positioned over the valve, and that phrase is carrying more weight than it looks like. The fountains of the deep are not a poetic flourish in these documents. They are infrastructure. Genesis says they broke open. Proverbs says they were established. Job says the sea was shut up behind doors when it burst out from the womb. These writers were describing the ocean as a system with inputs, and Enoch puts Leviathan at the intake. And if you want a modern picture of what actually sits at the bottom of a deep basin over a source of water, it is a hydrothermal field. Superheated fluid forced up through fractures in the crust at temperatures well over 300 degrees Celsius, feeding entire ecosystems that have never touched sunlight, in water that sits a few degrees above freezing everywhere else. Nobody knew those existed until 1977. Before that, The consensus was that the deep floor was a desert. Now consider what can actually be said about that location. In April of this year, the international project responsible for charting the ocean floor announced that 28.7% of the seabed has now been mapped to modern standards, which means roughly 71% of the floor of this planet has never been surveyed, not searched and found empty, never looked at. And the ocean has a documented habit of taking its time. The colossal squid was named in 1925, identified from beaks recovered out of a sperm whale's stomach. For a full century afterward, essentially everything known about the heaviest invertebrate on Earth came from remains found inside the animals that had eaten it. Nobody had ever seen a living one where it lives. On the 9th of March 2025, a remotely operated vehicle called Sebastian, working from a research ship near the South Sandwich Islands in the South Atlantic, filmed one at 600 meters down. It was a juvenile, 30 centimeters long and completely transparent. Adults are estimated to reach 7 meters, 100 years between naming the animal and seeing the animal. That is the honest state of the evidence. Not a sealed chamber, not a redacted file. Just an enormous unexamined volume of water and a well-documented pattern of very large things remaining invisible inside it for exactly as long as they want to. Which brings all of this back to the question the angel refused to answer. Enoch asked to be shown the power of the two monsters. He wanted the demonstration. He wanted to know what they could do. And the angel told him he was asking after something hidden, and moved on to the spirits of the thunder and the hail. But look at what the angel does answer a few verses later, and what every parallel text confirms. He never tells Enoch what these creatures are capable of. He tells him what they are for. They are prepared. They are kept. They are being held until a day that has already been scheduled. And on that day they come up out of the water and out of the wilderness at the same time, and the age ends. Which means the separation is not a cage. It is a clock. The two of them being apart is what the present world consists of. 4th Ezra says, the sea could not hold both. Baruch says they surfaced together at the end. Enoch says they were parted on one day, and never once says the parting was permanent. The story these texts are telling is not that God locked two monsters away and forgot about them. It is that the distance between them is load-bearing. The dry land, the ocean, the boundary the sea is not allowed to cross, all of it sits on top of an arrangement made on a single day, at the beginning, between two things that were never meant to occupy the same place. Enoch was shown where they were put. He was never shown how long they stay there. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe. Every week we uncover what was removed from Scripture.